Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome officially to Tuesday. How's everybody doing? Okay. Ben, you okay? Yeah. Rafay, all right. How am I doing? I'm doing pretty good, I think. I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's a somewhat busy week this week, but that's okay. Yeah, the weather's nice. What's that? It was very warm last night. Were you? Do you have a fan? No. Oh yeah, the AC wasn't keeping up. No. We had windows open, we had fans going, and still no. But it doesn't really, it doesn't get that hot too often here, so that's a little, yeah, that's a little strange. A little strange. It's usually closer to. Doesn't really go above it's usually like 24, like when it gets hot here, 24, 25. So yeah, we have a bit of a heat wave, hey? And grass is gonna start to die soon. But that's well, and the past few summers here have been pretty dry, at least drier than I would have thought. So maybe we'll have another hot, dry one. Maybe. Okie dokie. So who's here? Where's my thing? There we go. Sean is here, so good morning, Sean. Simran is here. Good morning, Simran. Reza is here. Good morning, Reza. Hamad is here. Good morning. Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Hassan is here. Good morning, Hassan. And Basil's here too. Good morning to you, sir. Okie dokie. Yesterday, what were we talking about? Oh, yes. We were talking about one of the things that's kind of baked into this sort of misogynistic or sexist situation in which many women around the world find themselves, including in North America, has to do with the control of their sexuality. Okay, and so we kind of talked about this yesterday, and we said that ideas about sexuality are very deeply held within people's cultures, right? So we have ideas about what men are, what women are. We have ideas about marriage and children. Sexual behavior in lots of cultures is either, a subject that people talk about carefully, or they don't talk about it at all, or they're very uncomfortable. And so, these ideas are kind of held very deeply within culture. And again, when you violate those ideas, you often create a strong reaction, right? But again, we kind of pretty organically yesterday, we pointed out the fact that there's a pretty glaring double standard with regard to men's sexual behavior and women's sexual behavior, right? So men are kind of encouraged, I was going to say allowed, but also encouraged to be promiscuous, right? They're encouraged to sort of run around and sort of have as many female conquests as they can, and often we see this played out in movies, right? Often our sort of male heroes, particularly male action heroes, are kind of like Baja. Morning, Baja. Many of our male action heroes are not entirely like Baja because they tend to be really good with the ladies, right? And if a typical kind of idea here is James Bond, right? James Bond sleeps with, what would you say, three women per movie? 3 different women? Yeah, on average. Yeah, and that's part of his character, right? That's part of his coolness, right? But again, we see that women are encouraged the exact opposite, right? They're encouraged not to be promiscuous, right? To remain pure, right? To not engage in any sexual activity outside of their primary relationship. And so we kind of asked the question, well, why is that, right? Why do we have this double standard? And so as a way of answering that, sorry, I got an extra slide there. as a way of answering that, I suggested, well, let's look at this TED Talk from Christopher Ryan, who wrote this book, Sex at Dawn, right? And he was making an argument about human sexuality and what it's for. And can you just remind me very quickly what the conclusion of that argument was?
It's in our nature.
It is in our nature. But why? What is our sexuality for as human beings?
Oh,
Secondly, yes, but firstly, yeah, right. So Christopher Ryan says that this is something we've evolved to create and maintain social relationships within the group, right? It's a bonding device, right? That's what it's for. And other animals don't really use it for that. And so when you see, lions having sex, they kind of boom, 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 and they're done, right? And that's all there is to it. But humans have a much more complicated sexuality, and the reason is because we're much more complicated social creatures, right? And so he gave us some, oops, that's the video there. He gave us some reasons to, I got extra slides in there. All right, he gave us some reasons to believe that, right? And so the first thing he did was he compared us to apes, right? He said that us humans are a type of ape. We're a very sophisticated ape, of course, but an ape nonetheless. And he said when you compare us human apes to other apes, we see that in terms of female copulatory vocalization, right? So female animals making noise when they have sex, external testicles, the availability of females for intercourse throughout their kind of menstrual cycle, and the kind of number of times these animals have sex per birth, you see that, well, there's kind of a pattern here, right? There's two types of apes, if you will, right? There's the apes over on the right there, like gibbons and orangs and gorillas, and they don't really have a lot of sex, right? They just have sex to reproduce. Good morning. But the chimps and the bonobos and us, of course, and we're very closely related to both of those, I think we share something like 98.4% of our DNA with bonobos. So we're really, genetically speaking, we're really similar, right? Obviously that point where that 1% difference is a big difference, but still, we're very closely related to these things, and we have more similarity with them, right? So Christopher Ryan says these animals are promiscuous, right? They're not pair bonding animals, right? And so I don't know if we talked about this yesterday, but you can kind of have three situations going on here. You can have pair bonders, right? So like the geese you see around here, a male and a female goose, they bond together, and then they kind of stay together for life, right? They're bonded to their partner. I guess penguins are like that too. I think Basil mentioned wolves yesterday. The other thing you can have is sort of a harem situation, right? So the gorilla there has a harem, right? So you've got the big alpha male, he's got a collection of females that he mates with, and he fights off all the other males to keep those females for his own, right? And then, so you can either have those two, or you can have the sort of chimp and bonobo model, where, again, they're promiscuous, right? There's sexual activity happening within the group. And Christopher Ryan says we're one of those, right? He also points out that there are cultures around the world for which they don't really pair bond at all, right? They don't really believe in monogamy. And so he points out the Mosuo from southwest China. There's a few other cultures that are like this too, but they're kind of the example that gets kind of cited in every textbook, where their marriages and the way they raise their families are not sort of connected to their sexual behavior. So, here in North America, your marriage and your sex life are kind of one and the same, right? But for the Mosuo, your marriage and your sex life are different things, right? And they aren't connected in the same way. And so for the Mosuo, they can have whatever sexual partners they want, and it doesn't matter, right? Because it's not a part of marriage, but for us it is. Oh God, I'm gonna sneeze in a minute. So yeah, he says that. Oh, sorry. Thank you. There's something that pollinates in June, and it's like the only thing I'm allergic to, and I don't know what it is. It's gonna go away in like a week, and it's only one thing. It's not everything. And I don't know what it is, but it's like every June I get just a little bit. But I can't complain about it because my partner is allergic to like everything outside, so she's taking allergy medication every day just to try to, you know,
Is she getting the shots?
stay normal. What?
The psychology shots.
No, but she takes like a prescription strength allergy medication. So for her, it's much more serious. So I can't I don't get to complain about my week of sniffles.
He's getting his allergy shots over the course of, I think, 2 years.
Uh-huh.
Because he's allergic to almost everything.
Oh my God.
He's allergic to this special pollen in Texas.
A special what?
This type of pollen that is only found in Texas, and he lives in Texas.
Of course.
He's allergic to dogs and cats. He has 2 dogs and 2 cats.
That sounds horrible. That sounds horrible. Especially now that I'm all sniffy, but okay, sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah, okay. So Ryan says that we are this is how our sexuality has evolved, right? We're not pair bonders, but we can choose to be, right? We can choose to be monogamous, we can choose to behave and create whatever rules we want. But Christopher Ryan is saying this is kind of how we're wired, right? We're more, here's a bonobo, we're more wired like this guy rather than some of the other primates, right? He also suggests as a premise to this argument that the sort of earlier vision of human sexuality isn't really supported by anthropological research, right? And in the video he called that the standard narrative, right? So he said that the standard thing that we used to think is that, or some of us still think, is that it was kind of a trade, right? Man was the hunter, right? And man provided food and shelter and protection from wild animals, right? And women promised to only have sex with him, and then that was the bargain, right? That was the trade. But Christopher Ryan points out, and rightly points out, that that makes no sense, because in hunter-gatherer groups, everybody shares with everyone else, right? If you're a woman in a hunter-gatherer group, you don't need a man to access food or shelter, right? That's ridiculous. And in many hunter-gatherer groups, it's actually the women who are providing most of the food, because women are the ones who go out and gather things like roots and berries and nuts and things like that, and men go out hunting. But if you've ever gone hunting, you'll know that you're not successful every single time. Sometimes you come home empty-handed. And so it's actually the women that are kind of feeding the group more consistently, and the men kind of bring the meat when they're successful, kind of thing. So this idea that, you know, women are sort of only accessing resources through men in hunter-gatherers, ridiculous. Doesn't work that way. But it does work that way in agriculture, right? When in farming communities, and that's what Christopher Ryan is kind of pointing us in the direction of, right? And so this is where those other two things that those other things that he said, right? He said that males in some societies monitor and control women's sexual behavior, and that women's sexuality had become conflated with property rights. What does that kind of ring true, that first one, that males monitor or control women's sexual behavior? Does that strike you as something that is true or real? How do men go about this monitoring and controlling of women's sexual behavior? Calling names? Like what do you mean? Oh yeah. Right. So Yeah,
If
so
you want to impose that, then you
yeah, so using, I'm not going to say it on camera here just in case, but yeah, using those types of words to sort of label women who, who aren't behaving according to men's rules or society's rules, or maybe they're the same thing, but yeah, they get labeled with that sort of hurtful term, right? And the message, of course, is you're behaving incorrectly, right? You should not do that. You know, behave according to the rules, right? It's a social punishment in a way, but um, how else? How else is women's um, sexual behavior monitored or controlled by men?
like in some situations, like usually it's always the man initiating, like if sometimes I don't know how to explain, but it's always the man initiating, and sometimes even I don't know how to explain it, but it's
Yeah, that the sort of we've kind of socialized both genders differently, right? So men are sort of encouraged to be the active ones, right? The chaser, the person who's making things happen, and then the woman is kind of expected to be submissive, right? To just sort of accept that these things are happening, or to let the man sort of
Do what you want.
basically, yeah, right. So yeah, there's definitely a difference there. um, any other ways you can think of controlling? What about dress codes in a school? Do you find that in the dress code there are more rules for girls than for boys? Have you found that before? Yeah. Well, why do you think that is?
from for them not to be exposed. I know that the female not really
R-
exposed, like short skirts, high heels, full
Yeah, there's a lot of rules about what parts of the body can and cannot be exposed, right?
they told me not to distract boys. I think
Yeah, right. There's rules about, yeah, because we don't want because we don't want boys to be distracted,
yeah.
right? And of course, uh, boys are going to be distracted by girls anyway. Like it doesn't matter. But two, yeah, yeah. What do you think the message is there, that girls have to cover certain parts of their body, and then boys are not really subjected to any of those rules? What does that mean, or how does that feel, or what message does it transmit?
Women are more sexualized.
Sexualized. So what does that mean to you? Women are way more sexualized.
More things to look at and do.
Well, yeah, right. The woman's body is far more sexualized than the man, right? And so, but then it's interesting because you would think that that would mean desirable, right? And yet we are, also sending a message that, oh, cover your body, right? It should not be seen, right? Because if people see it, then boys will not be able to study, right? And so there's kind of there's almost a little bit of shame built in there, I think, right? Like that you would have to sort of cover yourself to make sure that others are comfortable, sort of thing, right? The other thing that does, and maybe we can get to this later, or maybe we can't, I don't know if we have time, but the idea that that women are responsible for boys' behavior, right? So women have to dress a certain way to make sure that boys don't get distracted, right? And again, whose job is it to make sure that they don't get distracted?
Yeah, that whole makes their job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's it's boys' job not to get distracted. It's not girls' job to dress a certain way to make sure that they don't distract boys. And then when the boys do get distracted, we look at the girls and say, "Oh, stop distracting them," right? It's not girls, that's not girls' problem, but we make it their problem by doing that, right? What about the second one here? Does this, or hang on. Yeah, so Hamad here says that, well, guys don't usually wear revealing clothes, right?
See me on a night out.
What's that?
You should see me on a night out.
Okay, most of us don't. Most of us don't wear very revealing clothes, but that's interesting to think about as well, right? Why women's clothing is constructed differently, right? And that's not something that I have thought enough about to kind of explain to you, but it is worth thinking about, right? Why does women's clothing, particularly in the summer, of course, why does it show more skin than men's, right? Good morning. Why is women's clothing more revealing than men? Right? If you want to give me an answer, I'd love to hear it, but I don't have a clever response to that right now. But I think it's true. It's just a question of why and what does it tell us. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, there's a lot of confusing double standards and confusing messaging about women's bodies, right? Are they good or bad, right? Should they be seen or not seen, right? And it seems like such a narrow line, right? Between, you want to sort of be fashionable and kind of be comfortable, but if you show too much, then it's slutty, right? And so you don't want to be too slutty, but then you've got to find this invisible line to walk where you're comfortable, but you're yes, but what will be other people's reaction to that is the question. So yes, you can wear whatever you want.
Nowadays people don't really care about
No, or do they? What's that?
But yes, patience is possible. Because when you check even in the background of everything, traditionally, like almost every culture is like that. Something that has been there, I think, for many years and has been taken into consideration and been taken as a belief, and it has grown, and it's like really hard to get out of people's minds, even
Yeah.
when they don't tell you to judge. I think some people just don't do it because they don't want to look good. Probably like really naked, or they can't tell you.
Because sorry, go back one sentence. They don't want to.
Like, let's say somebody's like wearing something you're wearing,
Uh-huh.
right? And then I just think some people in the world or somewhere, they don't react because they don't want to be seen as, old fashioned or something.
Right.
So like, I think if we were to read mine, it could be good to see more people. I feel like that's something that has been going on since like the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And then, being of a woman and women being told what to wear, and like this past what is called sexy, what defines sexy.
Yeah.
So nowadays that people are being free and black, so because they still have that mindset that this specific part of the body is sexy, so now they're short. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something related.
Because what you're saying, there's so many things tied up with that, right? There's cultural rules about what's attractive and what's not. There's cultural rules about modesty, about dress, about gender roles. Of course, those things will change over time as well, right? Typically in the past, in most countries, people are more kind of conservative and traditional in the past, and now they've become more liberal, although not every country has kind of followed that trajectory. But yeah, and these things are all kind of tied up, right? And it's interesting again, when you talk about sexy and attractive, and what is sexy and what is attractive, the dominant group is usually the one who decides, right? And so for a society where men are in power, men are the ones kind of defining sexy, right? Men are defining what they want, right? Men are the ones who are framing, what is attractive and what isn't, right? Think about when we were talking about the Ariana Grande music video yesterday, where I talked about the male gaze, right? So think about it. If you're watching movies, and you are, that are predominantly written and produced by and for men, although that's changing more recently, but in the past, the sort of romantic lead, right? The romantic woman in the movie, she's always going to be attractive by men's standards, right? Men are the ones who are going to cast that actress, right? And say, this is how I want her to look in the film, and this is how I want her to act, and these are the words I want her to say, right? So you can see how men get to, just in that one area, they get to sort of custom make women, right? They get to make them according to their ideal fantasy, right? They can cast the actresses they want, they can dress them the way they want, they can write down what they want them to say, and yeah, we see this kind of version of what is sexy, right? And of course, women are going to absorb that, right? They're going to go to movies, they're going to see, the movie will frame this particular woman as, the girl that all the guys sort of just, are struck dead by. And so, yeah, women are going to learn, oh, that's what I need to be, right? That's what I need to look like. And yeah, we it sounds overly simplistic to kind of describe it that way, but we absorb things that way, right? Let's see. Okay, let me sort of explain what I want to explain from this. Okay, now the big difference that Christopher Ryan says here, it's agriculture, right? If you look at hunter-gatherers share things. They don't really have any possessions. They get married, but their marriages are a little bit kind of more loose than ours. And certainly they're less concerned about who their children actually are, right? So in a hunter-gatherer group, and we heard some anthropological examples where, tribes in the Amazon think that they can have multiple fathers, right? So they're not worried who the father is because there's 3 of them, right? There's no, there's not sort of there's not a lot of tension around whose son is whose, right? But in agricultural groups, you often find the opposite, right? Agricultural communities are often less equal, so men have more power than women, and they are usually very concerned about heredity, right? And whose son is whose, right? And one of the reasons is probably has to do with this. It has to do with patrilineality and property ownership and inheritance. Okay, so patrilineality is just the idea that you trace your ancestry back through your father's line. Okay, so I think most societies in the world trace it bilaterally. So if you think people on your father's side of the family and your mother's side of the family, they're all inside your family in some way, right? They're aunts or uncles or cousins or whatever, right? Sometimes the father's side gets a little more importance, right? There are some societies that just do one or the other. But here, most of the time in agricultural societies, we see that it's either strictly patrilineal or it's the father's side is more important, right? So usually what you see is that's where inheritance comes from, right? People, in agricultural communities, men are the property owners, and they pass things down to their son or their sons, right? That's kind of the normal way of things. But of course, the trick is that if you're passing down your wealth and your land generation after generation from father to son, the question is that how do you make sure that your son is actually yours, right? So if I'm an older guy and I have land and wealth and I want to pass it down to my son, I want to pass it down to my son, right? I don't want to pass it down to Rafai's son. Rafai can hand down his own stuff, right? But I want to make sure that my son is mine, right? But 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, how do you do that? How do you make sure that your kid is actually yours? Right? You control people's sexuality, and in particular, you control the sexuality of women, right? If you make sure that your wife does not have sex with anyone before she's married, and then when she's married to you, that she only has sex with you, then you can be assured, right, that your son is actually yours. And what you kind of find is that the more important that kind of father-son relationship is, and the more important the sort of handing down of land or wealth or responsibilities to the ancestors, the more important that is, kind of the less important people's sexuality is. And so you'll find that in societies like that, there's very tight controls about sexuality, right? You'll find, there's no sex before marriage. Once you're married, you only have sex with your husband or wife. If your husband should die, then that's it for you. You can't remarry. You'll find that in a lot of societies that either are agricultural or recently were. Okay? And again, it has to do with the inheritance of property, right? Making sure that your son is actually yours and not someone else's. Again, if you go back to hunter-gatherers, they don't really care. Hunter-gatherers don't really have stuff. They don't really own things. There's nothing to pass down, right? If this child, who I think is mine, actually turns out to not be mine, well, number one, I'd probably never find out. But two, it doesn't matter, right? Because there's no wealth, right? Nobody has things to pass on. And so this kind of idea of, really tight sexual controls, really strict monogamy, right? To the point where, in some countries, if you have sex outside your marriage, you may be facing, severe punishment, if not from your husband or from your family, maybe even from the state, right? And so that all comes out of agriculture and inheritance, right? It's not part of the way humans are necessarily wired, right? It's a cultural thing. And it's worth saying that, it may seem like, oh, well, agriculture or hunter-gathering, what's the big deal? Human beings switching from foraging to agriculture is probably the biggest change that has ever happened in the history of humans. Like in our 300,000 year history, or more if you want to go back further, that's the single biggest change that has happened to us. If that doesn't happen, if humans don't start to grow their own food, none of this happens, right? That switch makes possible everything about our modern world. And so it's impossible to understate how important that change is. And it has effects in all kinds of, it has cultural changes, it has biological changes, it has changes in health, changes in culture, changes in marriage patterns, all of this stuff. The number of children kids have, when kids get weaned, all this stuff changes as people switch to a new way of getting food. And so this is just one change of many. But yeah, Christopher Ryan is saying that when you switch to agriculture, people start to own things, right? They start to own land. They start to buy and sell land. They start to inherit it, right? Or pass it down. And once that starts to happen, people become very concerned about whose kid is whose, and is this kid actually mine? And so how do you make sure? There's no DNA testing, so you control the sexuality of both sexes actually, but predominantly you control the sexuality of women, right? You make sure that they don't have sex with anyone else except their husband, and then you know for sure, right? And that's kind of where that double standard came from, and it's also what he's referring to when he talks about conflating women's sexuality with property rights, right? The way that inheritance system works is if women follow the sort of sexual rules, right? If they make sure that they only have sex with their husband, right? That's how that property inheritance system works. If women start running around and having sex with whoever they want, the whole system falls apart, right? And so these things kind of become conflated or combined. And in some ways, women actually, in many places, start to be thought of as property, as things that men own. I remember, I don't have it on the top of my head here, but there was a sexual assault case in Alberta, but it was 100 years ago or something like that. And the case was that a husband was charged with sexually assaulting his wife, with raping his wife, basically. And the argument that came up was, no, he can't be guilty because you can't rape your wife. It's like, this is my phone. That's my phone. Can I steal my own phone? Impossible, right? You can't steal something that belongs to you. And they made the same argument that no, well, of course he can't rape his wife because that's impossible. It's his wife. What's that?
What was the verdict?
I don't remember, and this is the problem. I don't have it right on the tip of my tongue. But the argument was made that a man could not rape his wife because she, like the phone or the wallet or whatever, she belonged to him, right? And I'm sure we're all having a reaction like, oh my God, right? But again, women were something that men owned, right? In a way. Has anyone here been to a Christian wedding in a church? Yeah? Or seen one on TV at least? Yeah, we've all seen them in the movies, right? And so in a movie like that where there's the big marriage scene, there's like the priest up there, and then there's the groom and the best man, and they're usually looking a little questionable because they had their bachelor party the night before. Who does that anyway? Only in the movies do they do that. You'd have to be an insane person to go out and have like the wildest night of your life and then like get married at 9 o'clock the next morning. That's insane. But anyway, so the groom is standing there, and where's the bride come from? Yeah, she walks down the aisle, right? Da 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 da, right? So the whole thing, and who's walking up the aisle with her? Yeah, right. Her father's walking up the aisle. It's very sweet, right? Often they're both a little teary, right? It's very heartwarming, is it not? You've seen this, right? It's beautiful. What do they call that process? What do they call that? The process of him walking her down the aisle. Yeah, he's giving her away, right? And so again, this is not the way it works anymore, but traditionally, yeah, she would have been cared for and provided for by her father, right? And now her father's going to walk her down the aisle on her wedding day and give her to this other dude, right? The dude with the super brutal hangover. She's going to give her to this guy, or he's going to give her to this guy, right? And so, and again, that's why it's called giving her away. And again, you know, if you asked basically all women in North America or anywhere who did this custom, none of them would say, oh yes, now my husband owns me. Nobody would say that. But again, the tradition comes from that earlier time when women were, you know, women could not be independent, right? The only way they could get shelter and food and protection was in the house of a man, right? Whether it was their father or whether it was their husband, right? And so, again, we don't really think of this custom that way anymore, but, you know, it's called giving her away for a reason, right? Because she belonged to him, now she belongs to this new guy, right? Which is kind of gross. But It's where it comes from, right? So even here in North America, we're not an agricultural society anymore, or some sort of post-industrial modern information society, whatever we are, I don't know. But there's still leftover bits of cultural practice from earlier, right? From when we were more agricultural. And of course, all cultures have that, right? We have things that are kind of left over that we still do. Sometimes we don't know why we do them. Sometimes we do them just because they're tradition, right? Like the giving away has nothing to do with ownership at all, but it's tradition, right? And you know, I would suggest that most young women want their father to walk them down the aisle, right? They would really like that. Yeah, it's sweet, right? Yeah. What's that?
Like
Yeah.
back home, I was resisting to get married. The guys from the university have to your family, and then they have to negotiate at first.
Yeah.
So either because the cows are like a tradition to us,
Yeah.
but now during the modern world they convert cows to money. So how much we discuss and they convert to money. So the more money that is given to be taken,
Yeah.
and that's the power they like to have. And it's something that is done
It's yeah. So that's still happening in Rwanda. People are doing that. Very common. There's lots of cultures that have that, right? Some sort of financial exchange that either goes from the bride's family to the groom's, or vice versa, or sometimes both, right? And so there's lots of cultures that have that. Traditionally speaking, I think they're supposed to be, you know, like if I'm going to marry this woman here, right? And if we're going to get married, and then she's going to come live with my family and work on my farm. Basically what that means is I'm going to take a member of, like from her family, I'm going to take a member of their team, right? And put her on my team. And then she's going to be working in my household and benefiting us, right? So they're kind of losing out, right? They're
Buying it out.
kind of, right? You're compensating them for the loss of the member of that team, right? Sometimes there's exchanges that go the other way, right? The idea of a dowry where either, you know, I'm going to be marrying this girl, she's going to come live in my house, but I'm going to have to provide for her, right? It's going to be a strain on my resources. So maybe her family gives me money to sort of compensate for having to provide for this woman, right? Or maybe she will keep it as her own kind of, you know, spending money, or her nest egg, or whatever you want to call it. It depends, right? So traditionally speaking, many cultures have some sort of financial exchange one way or the other. And I can't speak to Rwanda or how it sort of worked in the past or worked, but what's that?
It's the same, it's still done,
Does it feel the way you described it, though? It almost sounds like a sale, you know, like you would negotiate a price and then pay for something.
I'm telling you the real thing. So you come, you're a guy, it's an organized day, they cook. It's like an official something that is actually done. So most of the girls who just go without doing that,
Yeah.
they're really sometimes abandoned by their families. They're like you're ashamed to us. That's not something they really value. So the guy's family, the father, the mother, whoever is in the family,
Yeah.
they organize, they think of whatever we have.
Yeah.
So it's because before they used to give cows, because like cows are very powerful. So first they
So it's,
do you have a personal example?
you don't have you don't have to say anything you don't want to, but
No, for with my mom and dad.
okay.
My dad, my dad's like shepherd, like this is not that person. So he got a stick and then went to my dad's farm, like from my mom, they sent somebody, and then just like threw a stick, like it was in cattle. So wherever I touched like the boundary, that was
Oh.
my mom. that was
They
all
drew a
because
line
from,
and then.
yeah, but that's because my dad's family were wealthy according to cows.
Okay.
But now that it's more than they come, then
Uh-huh.
they negotiate that like, we're giving you a truck of cows. So that's like 20 cows. And then they convert 20 cows to the money now.
Right.
Yeah. So the family's like, no, we don't want that. Add 2 trucks. So you see, they negotiate.
It's
No, yeah. And then after like, they call you out of your room, they're like, okay, you are. Now you start organizing your wedding.
I see. I see. But the transfer is only from the groom's family to the bride's
Yeah.
family.
And it's only attended by me.
Right. Oh, it's only attended by men.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And like we grown, not the young ones, like
The
aging,
the established,
yeah.
the elder ones.
The ones they call with experience. That. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so when the stick was thrown, was it your dad that threw it, or?
My dad. It was my grandpa from my dad's side. So they were like, for them, they're like, she's worth it. Like, throw wherever it reaches,
Uh-huh.
we will divide. Like, that part is yours.
Was he? Did he have a good arm? Was he able to throw it really far?
My mom's side, I think they chose somebody really good. I don't
Okay.
know. Those two, and I was like, okay, this is good.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. I have a video to show you actually, and that idea will come up in the video. They'll speak to a young woman from Lesotho, and she'll explain a very similar system of, sort of financial exchange or exchange of cows prior to. And yeah, like it's interesting. Maybe before we get into the video though, what do you think of it? Do you think that's okay, or do you not like it, or?
I mean, when you're there, you don't think of it.
Sure.
You don't even think of it because people that don't complain, actually, women fight to get their wealthy because they're like, I need to. Because that's like pretty, that's like you taking your family's status. I don't know, something good, apparently.
Which actually, if I can interrupt, I have a question. So the cows come from the groom's family to the bride's family, but do they belong to the bride?
No.
They just go into the.
To the family.
Okay.
It's like a price of raising the kids.
I understand.
Yeah. So now that like when you start traveling, opening up and everything, now you realize like that's slavery. Like you're selling somebody like
Well.
It's a property thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? And that's sometimes the problem is that, again, I can't speak to how people thought about it in the past, but yeah, sometimes these traditions, continue, but our kind of system of values and beliefs in a culture kind of evolve and change over time, right? And eventually, sometimes we get to the point, good morning, we get to the point where it's like, oh, why are we doing this? Because, the meaning that it used to have is now seems to have shifted, and it doesn't make any sense, right? Or people are having trouble thinking about it in the same way as they used to.
Like culture is kind of something that's always different. Everywhere I've been, like culture is something you talk about and people just like talk about it. It's something that you will not know how you go to say, how you react to it.
Yeah.
The reflex is like really fast.
Yeah.
So something that like usually are very as a people are just like, because in Nairobi,
Yeah.
where they practice the what's the word for women?
Circumcision, yeah.
Yeah, what's the word?
Circumcision.
No, this a name they give it.
There's a few different words for it depending on what you're trying to say. Some people say female genital mutilation.
Yes.
That's kind of a loaded term, but yeah, that's.
So when they talk to the women there, the women were like crazy about it, like that's our culture. Why are you stopping us? But in actual sense, that's not right.
Yeah.
But because it's to them it's culture, so it's like really hard to educate somebody.
Yeah.
When they're
Well, it is, right? Because and we've talked about this, our socialization is so completely encompassing that it's hard not to believe anything your culture teaches you, because that lesson is reinforced everywhere else, right? And yeah, for for many cultures that practice that, yeah, that's how you become a woman, right? That's that transition from being a girl to being a woman. That ritual marks that, right? But of course, here, in the West, we kind of see a practice like that and think, oh my God, that's horrific, right? But yeah, but the cultural view of it is different, right? Not that I support it, but I know what you're saying. It's, when your culture has taught you something and that lesson has been reinforced, it's really tough to not believe it, or to to see it as, to see it as, needing change, right? um Holy smokes. Okay, do we have any other questions or things we should talk about right now, or should we take a little break? What do you think? Take a break? Break is always the right answer. Okay, let's take a little break, come back, and then I think I'll show you that video that I talked about. It has some of the cow issue, but also has other things as well.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and we're back. So, having kind of discussed um, sexism in advertising and movies and TV and music, and having talked about a little bit of maybe some biological and anthropological reasons for this sexual imbalance, the last thing I wanted to show you was a very short. Sorry, I'm sniffing all the time. It's very gross. The last thing I wanted to show you was just a very short kind of mini documentary from BBC here that talks about sexism and kind of what stands in the way of women being equal to men. Okay, and I'm kind of hoping that in watching this, it will lead us to talk about a few other things that may come up in the process of watching this short documentary. But this is what I want you to pay attention to as we watch. Number one, so how are boys or men or girls or women, how are they socialized differently in the cultures that we visit? And so the narrator here will take us to 4 places. He'll take us to the UK, he'll take us to Iceland, he'll take us to Lesotho, and he will take us to Jordan. And so we'll meet some young women from these 4 countries. They'll talk a little bit about their experience and how they kind of perceive sexism to be affecting their lives in their own country. And then, yeah, maybe we can have a discussion about that. So pay attention to how men and women are socialized differently in these different countries. Pay attention to the ways in which women's lives are limited by the sexism that we see. Sorry. And number 3, what ultimately is standing in the way, right? Why, if we started off with reasonable inequality between men and women in hunter-gatherer groups, and then for thousands of years women have kind of lost that power or lost that equality, why aren't we equal yet, right? What's keeping us from achieving that? Okay, so just 3 kind of simple questions, but I'm hoping that they will lead to some discussions or some things that kind of stand out to people, and we can kind of pull those apart. Okay, so for online people, the video, the link and the questions are in Microsoft Teams for you. And so looking at the time here, let's watch 20 minutes of this. Yeah, let's watch 20 minutes, and then we'll come back very briefly at the end of class. Maybe we'll talk about 1 or 2 things, and then class will be over and we'll pick it up tomorrow. Okay, so watch 20 minutes, online people. The link is in Microsoft Teams, and we will see you very shortly. Okay, so good luck. let's take a pause here and just see where we are. La 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 la. There. So, what are we seeing in terms of different socialization here in these different cultures? So, what are we hearing from? Well, let's start with Vigdis, the girl from Iceland. What were we kind of hearing from her in terms of her experience? What was she telling us? Okay, so she feels some extra pressure to appear on her appearance, right? To look a certain way, right? Definitely true. What else do we hear from Vigdis? Not much. She seems to. They kind of start off, and she seems to have more freedom than most, right? They rank Iceland as the best in terms of gender equality, right? So she's got kind of a lot of freedoms that maybe other girls can't enjoy, or maybe she lives in a safer country, or so we hear those things from her, right? Do we meet? I guess we meet Shui Shui next, right? She's the second girl we meet, or is it Mira? I've lost track. Let's talk about. Maybe we only got 5 minutes. Okay, let's talk about Mira. So Mira's from Jordan, right? And what do we hear from Mira? Apparently. If you hold it this way. If you hold the gun sideways, then it's very masculine. I don't know.
Bullets don't work if you hold it sideways.
They don't work?
Like, they still work, but the trajectory is not going on.
Yeah, you can't aim sideways. So yeah, so okay, so that's a little confusing, right? How shooting handguns is more feminine than basketball. I think we're all a little confused, but who knows? But what's Mira relating about her experience? The what? Right. So in comparison with someone like Vigdis, who kind of goes out and hangs out with who she wants and walks home alone, Mira doesn't really have those freedoms, right? So there's certain people that her dad doesn't want her hanging out with. She's probably not allowed to go places alone. Yeah, and her brother seems to have a lot more freedom. Period. And then he's also, he said he breaks his dad's rules, and he doesn't seem too worried about that either. Although I will throw in, how old is Saad? 21. How old is Mira? 15, right? Is there a big difference between 15 and 21? Yeah, it's a big difference, right? So I feel like the interviewer is kind of playing it up a bit, but it's like, yeah, he's quite a bit older than she is, right? So is there sexism here? Maybe. But also, yeah, you have different privileges when you're 15 as opposed to when you're 21, right? What else does Mira talk about? The last thing they're talking about, kind of marriage and boyfriends and things while they're playing that game. What are they talking about?
She said yes, so
Right.
she said like if you want to marry someone, let him know like, well, how would you react?
Yeah.
So he said that it's your decision. You can marry whoever you want.
Yeah.
But whatever happens after that, it's not my responsibility.
Yeah, that's.
If anything bad happens, it's not my responsibility.
That, yeah, and I wonder about that because Marwan kind of phrases it in a particular way, and I'm not really sure what he means, right? Like, if Mira, marries someone that he doesn't approve of, is he saying like, well, you're dead to me, whatever happens, I don't care? Or is he just saying, I may not support you in that decision because I don't agree with it? But, I'm not sure, what do you think he means?
I'll tell you what it means.
Yeah.
Like, as I was born, like an Arab Muslim country, as he said.
Yeah.
So when he said I will not be responsible for what happens. It means like anything bad happens like within the marriage, if there's a divorce or anything,
Yeah.
you cannot blame me.
Okay.
I was the one responsible. It was your decision.
Right.
So you take a responsibility for it.
But he'll still like help her, right? Okay.
Of course.
Well, and I think that's okay, right? I don't know that she could, if it was entirely her decision, I think it would be unreasonable of her to blame her father, right? Yeah, so that's the thing, right? It's hard to, the way he says it, it's like, oh, that could mean a lot of different things, right? I always assumed it was like that, right? That he was, he would say that he didn't support her, but yeah, if it goes wrong, then it's her fault, right? Like, what can he do? But yeah, but again, culturally, it's hard to know what's being said, and of course, I suspect that English is not Marwan's first language either, so he's, he may not be communicating things quite as eloquently as he would in Arabic, right? There's much more to talk about, but I think we're going to have to press pause on that and come back tomorrow and do that, okay? Any questions or things people want to say before we go? No? What's that?
Do you have an answer?
No, do you want one? Okay. Because I can make one. We could all come in and I could hand it out to you with a little bubble scorecard. You're all good. Okay. Okie dokie. Yeah, and I particularly want to talk about Shui Shui's schoolmate there when he's talking about how he doesn't want to marry anyone that makes more money than him. I want to talk about that too, but we'll save that for tomorrow. So pack it up. I'll see you then, or I'll see you in about 20 minutes. Okay. So bye guys.